All right, welcome back. So this week, as we move on, this should be the chapter that comes after you all have completed your midterm. We'll be discussing chapter 8 this week. And I did want to just kind of briefly on the side here say that if you did not get a chance to take your midterm before this time, basically. So if you did not do it on time, I do encourage you to still go in and complete your midterm and also answer the midterm essay question. Mainly, even if you're going to get a late grade on that, I would prefer that you still take it, or even if you're afraid maybe you might not do very well on it, it's still preferable that you go in and complete the midterm late because it's a good chunk of points, and I don't want some of you missing out on those points because it could potentially affect your grade overall since it is worth such a large amount of points, and it's better to go ahead and get some points than to get none. So if you did not get a chance to do the midterm yet, please go in and complete that. If you're trying to take it late and for some reason it's not letting you on there, I don't think I set a due date on it because I wanted people to be able to take it late if they wanted to. But if for some reason you go in and try to take the midterm and it's not letting you in, just send me an email and let me know, and I'll see if I can open it up or put your name on there to where you can still take it. And then the midterm essay question, the discussion post, that does not have a lock date on it. So you should still be able to get into that and also complete the midterm essay question. So let's go ahead and just get started on chapter 8 so we can hopefully make this a pretty short video. Chapter 8 is going over three main things. It's going over reading, it's going over writing, and then it's going over presenting. I focus mostly on the reading and writing aspect because most people do have to do presentations in classes, but it's not as often as you probably will likely have to do reading for your classes, and as likely as you'll probably have to do several different kind of writing assignments for your different classes. And the chapter just mainly goes over kind of recognizing some of the things that you could do to make, let's say, reading your textbooks a little bit more beneficial for you. Because if you're anything like me, when I was in college, I would read my textbooks, but I did find that a lot of the times I would do my reading. Sometimes I would read a page and then I would get to the end of the page and just realize that I don't remember hardly anything that I just read. And it was always difficult for me because then I just have to go back and I start reading again. And I didn't really have any tips or tools that anybody had ever recommended to me that could kind of help me get past that. And don't get me wrong, I love to read, but I mean, I like to read the types of things that I enjoy reading. And so most of the time, most of my textbooks just weren't really that engaging for me. And so I must have just kind of zoned out as I read, and I didn't really get a lot of the information that I needed. And so the book has a couple of tips and tricks that you could potentially try as you're doing your reading for your textbooks that might help you remember more of the information and kind of get through your textbook reading a little bit better. And it does have a section that has some really good information on writing tips, because a lot of people struggle with writing, especially in college, because you might be taking an English class or a comp class, and maybe you don't feel confident in your skills for writing, or you just feel like you make too many spelling mistakes or grammar mistakes and things like that. And it's a lot of the times what holds people back from writing well is that they kind of talk themselves out of it. And so the book has some good tips there as well. So as you get started, the chapter pretty much starts on page 200. It goes over some basics like, building your reading skills, recognizing the building blocks. And that's just some basic information that you can read through as you're doing your reading for the chapter. And as you're kind of moving on, we get to this section on page 204 that says how to read right. So how to read the right way, especially for academic reading. So that way you're getting the most out of your textbook and you're not reading and feeling like you're not retaining any of the information that you read. And the first thing that we come to in the read right section, it has a bunch of different numbered areas, and it's kind of giving you some pointers on how to read right. Like, for example, the first one says understanding what being a good reader is all about. And then the second one, number 2, that starts on page 205, it says taking stock of your reading challenges. And that's going to be your first exercise for the week. It's not really an exercise, but if you look at number 2 on page 205, it says, which of the following are reading issues for you? Rank order your top 5, with number 1 being your most difficult challenge. And so if you look on page 205, you're going to see this section right here that has a bunch of basically different words that are describing reading difficulties that people typically have. And so you're just going to take 5 that you think are your biggest reading challenges. So when you have to read one of your textbooks for your class, or it could be reading in general, which of these 5 are your biggest difficulties in reading? Because sometimes it's just like with some of the other assessments we're doing, sometimes just calling attention to the things that are specific that we have difficulties with help us overcome them. Because if we don't really ever think in those terms of what is it that's making this challenging for me? What is it that's actually keeping me from being a better reader for academics or just a better reader in general? Sometimes it's better to actually look at that and have a word for it and go, okay, this is something that's specific that I have an issue with, and this is why I'm not, reading the way that I should. So find on that list what your top 5 are. Remember, if you choose number 1, that should be your biggest reading challenge all the way to 5, basically, but all 5 of those are ones that you feel for yourself are your biggest reading challenges. And then as you read through the rest of that, and then basically all you're doing for that one is you're just taking a picture of it after you rank it. If you do it in the book, that's fine. If you want to do it on a Microsoft Word document or on notebook paper, just please make sure you're writing the word that you're choosing and whatever rank it is that you're putting next to it. So that way I know specifically which ones you're ranking. But as you're moving on with your reading, there's a lot of different other pointers. And one for me, I think would have benefited me more when I was in college had I actually done this, because I used to highlight in my books because I always used to buy used textbooks because they were cheaper. And so most of the time they already had marks in them and I pretty much expected I wasn't going to sell them back for that much anyway. And so what I used to do is I used to highlight things because that was the only thing I could think of at that time that I could do to kind of, I guess, just draw attention to certain things in the chapter, and I thought would help me study better and remember information better. But for me, it didn't really work that well, but it was really the only thing that I could think of that I could do outside of just reading the words that could potentially help me remember the information better. And one of these, on the list here, when you're reading through that read write section, one of these on the list on page 207, it says make detailed notes. And it never occurred to me when I was doing my reading to have a notebook paper out and to actually physically be taking notes of as I'm reading a section, and some of this information maybe is obvious to me that this is important information about the chapter that I needed to know. It never occurred to me to take notes as I was reading, and just maybe the physical act of actually taking notes and taking down important things in that section, and then any little, pieces of information that kind of support whatever it is that I'm writing down. It could have potentially helped me remember information better. And also, in my mind, the way I look at it is if I would have taken notes as I read, potentially, if I wanted to go back and study for a test or something like that later on, instead of going back and going, oh gosh, I'm going to have to go and reread the chapter again because I'm studying for a test. If I would have taken notes as I had been reading and taken down all the important information from the sections, potentially all I would have to do is review my notes, because if I took good notes while I was reading, I'd be able to review my notes and I wouldn't have to go back and read the whole entire chapter again. So for me, I wish I would have known that, or somebody would have told me that, because that probably could have helped me a lot. So anyway, that's just one of the ones that called out to me whenever I had gone over this chapter when I first started looking at this textbook and I was deciding what things to discuss. That was one of the ones that I really wish would have been something that I could have used. But there's several in here, and some of these other suggestions might help you potentially kind of think of things that you could do to help you read right. And it has 12 of them, and it goes all the way to page 208. And then on page 209 is when they start talking about writing. And the writing part is important because, yes, most of us have taken English. Most of us have basically learned how to write. But a lot of times, maybe the way it was explained to us, or just kind of how it had been taught to us when we were younger, maybe it never really caught on. And from that point on, we just never felt confident with our writing because we never really felt like we understood how to write well. And when you're in academia and when you are taking college classes, a lot of times you are expected to write papers, or you're expected to do essay questions on your tests. And the better that you can write, even if it's little things that you can change that can help you write better, a lot of times that boils down to less points missed on those kinds of things that you have to do, papers, essay questions, things like that. And so the book, I like the way that it breaks it down because it makes it pretty simple. It only puts it over, a few pages, and it's basically showing you writing as a process. So everybody's heard of pre-writing. So that could be anything from, taking down just little ideas and things as you start to try to figure out what you want to write about, and just kind of writing down different ideas and stuff, because usually the point of that is to kind of get your brain in that mode of like, okay, I can organize these different ideas that I have, and maybe I can figure out what exactly I want to write about. But if you're reading through the pre-writing section, it basically gives you a bunch of different ideas on how to do a good job of pre-writing, so you set yourself up to do the actual writing very well. And so, for example, like number one, it's talking about, first think about what is the assignment even asking me to do, because a lot of times you read through the directions and you're just kind of like, okay, maybe I'm writing about this, I'm not really sure. And you have to really dissect, okay, what is it exactly that the assignment wants me to do? What are the parameters? What is it that my professor is specifically looking for? Because when you start out with basically knowing exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing, it helps you focus better on, okay, this is what I have to be looking at. Because a lot of times with writing, people sometimes are bouncing around to different areas and things because they're not really sure what it is they're supposed to be doing or writing about. And then that stresses them out. And another one is like, who is my audience? Number three, can I compose a strong thesis statement? Because most papers have a thesis, because you're basically saying, this is what I'm going to be writing about. These are the types of things that I'm going to research, because I want to basically, I wouldn't say prove, but I want to basically back up whatever it is that I am saying I'm going to write about, or whatever kind of theory or something that I'm coming up with that I'm going to write about. I'm going to find all this research because I'm going to try to back up this thing that I am going to write about. That is a very basic, explanation of a thesis statement, but the book goes over that better. So I'll let you all read that. But, it just has a bunch of different things. Have I done enough research? And it even says setting target dates when you start, doing your writing, setting target dates of, I'm going to get this little bit of my paper done by this date, and I'm going to get this little bit of paper done by this date. And you're kind of piecing it all together, so you're not sitting down one night before your paper is due and stressing out about trying to knock out an entire paper in a night. If you kind of pre-plan, like, I'm going to do these things in certain dates, it all can kind of come together, and you're not stressing out trying to get it done all at one time, or putting it off because you really don't like writing. It's better to kind of get yourself prepared to take that step each time to kind of build your paper that way. And then when you get to page 212, it's actually talking about the writing part. So you've done the pre-writing, you've built some ideas, you've figured out what your thesis is going to be. You maybe set some dates and some things that you can kind of plan out, like when you're going to do different steps of your writing. Maybe you've already done some of the research, so that way you have these different things that you're going to be able to pull from sources that you're going to be able to use in your paper, and now you're ready to start writing. And so as you're reading through that section, it's got some good ideas of basically what you can do as you're doing the writing, to kind of help give you an idea of, like, this is things that I can do. This is how I can make my paper come together really well. And a lot of it is the pre-writing part, getting yourself ready, because once you have all the research done and you have everything kind of planned out, just putting the paper together is not necessarily as stressful as people think it has to be. And then after, the next section after that is talking about rewriting. And that's basically, after you've written your rough draft for your paper, even if it's not something that you normally do by practice, it is always a good idea to, do your rough draft, walk away from it for a little while. Even if you've done it ahead of time enough that you can leave it alone for a day, it's always a good idea to go back and read through your paper after you've completed your rough draft. Go back after you've given yourself a break from it for a while and reread it. Go through it, because you're going to catch a lot of things. Maybe you're going to catch a sentence that doesn't make very much sense. Maybe you're going to catch some grammar errors that, you didn't see before. Things like that. And you may even, after you've kind of taken a break from it, you may even, as you're reading through it, go, this paragraph, I'm not really explaining something the way that I want to, or maybe I didn't put enough information there and I feel like I need to, add a little bit. Sometimes people choose to take some things out because it's not really adding to their paper in a great way. So they choose to kind of remove some things. So it's always good to proofread and go back, read through your paper after you've taken a little break from it, and kind of correct some things, update some stuff, because it's going to help you. And the biggest thing that basically this section on rewriting is saying to proofread. A lot, I can tell when a lot of students turn in essay questions, papers, things like that. I can tell that they didn't go back and read through their paper or their essay before they submitted it. They just did it, and they basically submitted to me a rough draft because they didn't go through and check and make sure that they didn't have a bunch of grammar errors. They didn't go through and even read it to see if it made sense, because a lot of times if you go through your paper, what I used to do is I would read it out loud. So after I was finished writing my rough draft, I would, kind of walk away from it for a while. I was happy I got my rough draft, because half the time that's the biggest battle, is just getting the paper written, and then kind of going through and doing the proofreading after is really not the hard part. It's just a step that most people for some reason don't take. And I always recommend proofread your paper before you turn it in, because you could potentially keep yourself from losing a lot of points on your papers, on your essays, if you go through and proofread before you turn it in, because you will catch mistakes. You will see things. You'll see a misspelling. You'll see a comma that's not there. You'll see a period and a capitalization after the period that you forgot to do because you were just writing your paper really quickly, trying to get it knocked out. Proofread your paper. You could potentially not lose as many points that way if you go and proofread. So that, out of that section of the chapter, is my biggest recommendation, because I can tell when I've done grading of papers and essays that that's one of the biggest things that I end up taking points off for, is because I can tell that it was not, nobody proofread it, nobody went through it, and just really simple grammar mistakes and things like that could have been easily taken care of and not lost points on. So that's basically for that section of rewriting. And then when you get to page 214, this section is really good because it's really going to give you some good ideas about how to build a better paper. Because if writing is something that kind of worries you, this is a really good section. It says, building a better paper, the 7 C's. And you do need to know the 7 C's. So that way you're going to see that on your final when we cover this chapter on the final. So make sure you read through the 7 C's. And they're really very, very common sense, but very good things to be thinking of when you're writing your paper that's going to help you build a better paper. So definitely read through the 7 C's and make sure you understand them and kind of get them. And basically, if you have to write a paper anytime soon, refer back to this chapter, try to get some ideas of things that you could potentially do to build a better paper. So that way, maybe, hopefully, you'll feel more confident and you'll feel like you've written a better paper, because it is intimidating for a lot of people. I know a lot of people that get very intimidated about having to write papers because for whatever reason, they don't feel like they write good papers. And everybody can learn how to do it. You don't have to be an author. You don't have to, be an expert at something in order to be able to write a good paper. You just have to basically know the good building blocks to get there and how to kind of, do the whole steps of doing your pre-writing, getting everything planned out, doing your research, and then putting your paper together, and then proofreading your paper. And then after that, the section after this that goes into like public speaking. So if you have a class where you ever have to do a speech, or maybe a group project where you're going to have to get up in front of your class to present, this is a good section for you all, especially if anybody gets anxiety about presenting or having to do public speaking like that. It has a lot of good tips and things that you could do to potentially kind of bring down your anxiety, how to put together a good presentation. So half the time, if you have a really good presentation and you have everything really well organized and you know what you want to say, and if you're really prepared for it, that is a lot of times more of the battle than just the fear of having to get up and speak in front of people. A lot of times it's very much being prepared, having practiced, having really knowing what is in your presentation so you don't have to, look down constantly at your notes. There's a lot of really good tips in this section of the chapter that I'm not really going to discuss in detail because specifically for our class, we don't do a presentation, but I do encourage you, obviously, you might see some questions on presenting and information like that on your final, but I just encourage you to really kind of read through that section, especially if you find that public speaking is something that does cause you anxiety and that you're not very comfortable with it. And you will see on page 218, it's figure 8.1, and it says 9 ways to hack your speaking anxiety. And you'll see an actual figure there that has some good information that you might want to read through that, since it's not technically a part of like the paragraphs of the chapter, but you might want to take a look at that figure, because it's got a lot of good information on ways that you could potentially, keep yourself from getting that anxiety and kind of calming yourself down and getting yourself to a point that you're ready to present. And, you potentially could, make yourself have a better presentation that way. And then that's basically it for the chapter. The other thing that we are going to do for this chapter is not really an exercise. It is going to be the challenge reality check that is on the bottom of page 224. It's this section here. A lot of times people come up here and they think they're supposed to be answering one of these. It's not. You're answering this section right here. Also, be prepared if you're watching this before you read the chapter. Be prepared to take note of how long it takes you to read the chapter, because there is a question on here, since part of the chapter has to do with reading. There's a question on here that asks you to take note of whatever time it is that you start reading chapter 8. And then it also asks you to basically, as soon as you're done reading chapter 8, to basically write down how long it took you to read the chapter, because it's kind of a good way for you to understand, do I read too fast? Do I potentially maybe read too slow? Do I take too many breaks when I read and I kind of get myself off track? There's a lot of different ways that people kind of get their reading done, but it's good to consider, okay, how long did it take me to read these 20 pages or something like that? So you kind of get an understanding of yourself, how long it takes you to read. And sometimes I've had people do this reality check question and they notice, okay, it only took me 20 minutes to read the chapter, and they'll even reflect on it and say, but I don't really remember a whole lot. And honestly, I probably should have taken more time. Maybe I should have taken some notes. Maybe I should have, done a little bit more as far as taking my time with the reading, so I actually remembered more of what I read. And then on the opposite spectrum, I've had people answer this question where they feel like it took them way too long to read the chapter, and they admittedly will say, well, I had a lot of distractions. My phone was going off. I decided to go play on my computer, whatever the case may be. And it's just a way for you to think about, as you're doing your reading, when you kind of see, okay, if I'm being timed and I actually have to see how long it is that take me to read the chapter, it's good to kind of reflect on that. But answer all of those questions. There's 5 of them. And just remember, before you start your reading, take note of what time you start reading, and then take note of when you're done. So that way you can put on here how many hours or minutes it took you to get through the entire chapter and get it read. And that is it. And so once you finish the reality check for this one, I've had some people, if they're writing in their books, they just answer the questions here, but, feel free to just do this on a Microsoft Word document or do it on notebook paper. It might be easier that way, so you can write a little bit more and not have to try to squish it into this little area right here. But other than that, that's pretty much it for chapter 8. If you have any questions this week, let me know. And like I said, please go and take the midterm if you haven't done it yet and get some of those points, so that way you're not losing out on a lot of points there. And if you have any other questions or anything like that, just shoot me an email and let me know. Otherwise, have a great week, and I will see you all next week.